They specifically said, young people, you need to accept the fact that you will never grow old in this system and that you will never achieve any of the goals or things of that nature that this world may set for you. All right. I remember that. And by the way, I have grandchildren now. One of the first things that surprised me was how we handle the congregation contributions. This is like very, very corporate, like in terms of, how organizations handle things like that. But this was
Sure.
eye-opening too, doing some relief work following some storms that happened. And we went out to help brothers and sisters who had some damage to their homes. Before we went ahead and did the work, the brothers and sisters had to agree that we'll go ahead and do this work on the house. But if you receive anything in the way of insurance, payments, what have you, you have to pay that back to try to helpfully win that person back. It didn't seem like that was the top priority. It was about how do we nail this person so that we can disfellowship them.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am very excited to have with me today Mr. Perry Vanderwall. He was raised in the religion for the most part. I believe that he's going to go into detail about that through the 1975 fiasco. He's got a background in finance that he told me about. That's very interesting because he became the account servant, which changed his mind about how he viewed the Watchtower and the organization. So I'm very keen to talk to him today and for you guys to hear his story and what he has to say. So welcome, Perry. Very glad to have you with us today. How you doing?
I'm great, John. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I was when you sent me the email and you sent the video with your background and like the little 2 to 3 minute thing I asked for. I'm like, yeah, I have to talk to, I got to talk to this guy because your history is just really interesting. And I'll be real, I've never had a conversation with an ex-JW who lived through the 1975 fiasco. Now, I've read lots of comments from people who leave comments on the channel who are old enough to have been through it, validating what was said, but to actually get to pick your brain a little bit about that and the other things that you told me about, very interested in that. But before I get into it, what is it? Because you told me in your video that you have another church now, you're very active, like you said on it, and all that's great. You've been there for a long time. What made you decide to reach out and want to tell your story now? Like, what's the thing?
After leaving, it was a while before I was willing to talk about it. When I first joined my church, as a matter of fact, a couple of folks reached out to me and they were like, oh, I want to talk to you and have you come and speak about Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was kind of like, no, I don't want any part of that. And primarily it was because that whole thought process of being an ex-JW or an apostate or what that looks like, I was still struggling with that, and I think it was kind of too new. It was kind of too new. It's like if you end a relationship, it's not a good idea to just jump right into another relationship. And so with that, I was exploring the Christianity thing, but I wasn't ready to go and tell my story. I used to say that I'm not a witness, but I'm not anti-witness. Uh,
Mm,
and I still kind of say that because I have nothing against the rank and file Jehovah's Witness. And as a Christian, I'm not going to go into take too much time on it, but as a Christian, I remind folks that when you see that person at the door, the person at the door is not your enemy. It's not the enemy. They're not the enemy. They've been deceived by the enemy. And so, with that being said, I wasn't ready to kind of go into that foray straight away. But over time, I felt it was important because so many people were having questions about what it was like being a Jehovah's Witness. It's kind of like you're like the pink elephant in the room. Everyone wants to know about it because it's like such a rare thing. It seems like to have a witness who actually converts to Christianity.
mhm.
And so you kind of are the odd one, and that's kind of how it started.
I'm glad you touched on that because we were talking before I started recording, and I just wanted to remind everybody of this. About 5 years ago, I took a poll of all the people on the channel. And back then, I had about 20,000 subscribers, and now it's over 30. So I really should take it again. But back then, about 5 years ago, I asked people when you left, did you either become or stay a Christian, depending on how you view the witnesses? Did you join some other religion that has nothing to do with Christianity? Or did you become agnostic or atheist? And it was split up about a third, a third, a third. About a third, found some other church, or maybe they didn't go to church, but they, continued believing, reading the Bible, whatever. About a third went to completely different religions, a lot of them Eastern, and about a third became agnostic or atheist. And I've said many times, I don't care. It is not between them and me what they do. If you're a good person, you're fine by me. I'm not going to judge you for that. But it's just very interesting how many people leave and then just completely abandon, which is fine again, but they completely abandon their own sense of spirituality. And it's interesting to me that you're one of the ones that didn't. And we'll get into that a bit later, but I am very interested in your story and the 1975 thing. But before we get into it, because I do want to get right into that, your background and being raised in religion and all that, what do you hope by the end of this for the viewers to get out of this conversation?
Um, to understand a couple of things. One, if you have friends and relatives who are Jehovah's Witnesses, um, understand that it's an organization that's in flux right now, and there are a lot. I think there are a lot more Jehovah's Witnesses who have questions, doubts, or misgivings about where they are, but are not ready to make that move yet. Because as you and I both know, it takes a lot to get you to that point because the Jehovah's Witnesses make the cost of leaving so high. And so you have to kind of be at that place wherein you're like, come what may. I'll figure it out as I go along. And so when it comes to if you know folks who are like that, understanding how their mind works, how what their life is like, how scripted it is in terms of every step that they take and how it's measured and monitored and how they're evaluated and what that does to the person's psyche. And if you understand that, it can help you be a bit more patient with that individual or individuals, having realistic expectations. One of the things I said to you at the outset was that when I talk to groups about Jehovah's Witnesses, I tell them you're just come to accept that you are never going to get a doorstep conversion of a Jehovah's Witness. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not going to happen because they're not wired that way. And they work in twos for a reason. And also they are so indoctrinated that they immediately chastise themselves if they have questions or doubts. So those few things, but understanding patience, understanding who they are, how they operate, how they think, and that may give you the opportunity to kind of find that little chink in the armor, as it were, if there is one,
Mm-hmm.
and that crack can widen into something bigger.
Well, I appreciate that coming from that compassionate stance rather than a like fiery, judgmental stance. And look, people have been through what they've been through. Some people have been put through the ringer by the Watchtower. It does not at all. I don't have an issue with someone who gets very bitter or resentful. I mean, they have the right to be bitter and to have very negative feelings towards the Watchtower and the religion. It's different for me, and apparently it's different for you, like that approach to it. I look back and pity the people
Hmm.
that I was with and my younger self
Yeah.
for having been in it. And so I just appreciate that we're kind of on the same page in that way, being compassionate toward people. I've said on the channel many times, I do not hate Jehovah's Witnesses. I've been accused of that by so many people in the comments who don't actually watch the videos. I pity them and I
Yeah.
want them to be free
Yeah.
of that
Exactly. Exactly.
religion and the indoctrination and the chains that they're under. That's it.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, tell us about your early life and your background. Like, were you born into it? How'd you come into it? How young were you? Just go through that with us, if you would.
So I was what you would call born in. I was raised by my maternal grandmother from 6 months old. My parents had issues that didn't make them the ideal, and so my grandmother took myself and my sisters and raised us all. She had become a Jehovah's Witness in the 1950s. She along with her sister, and so that was my family. That was my world. I had my we spent all our time at our aunt's house or with grandmother and so forth, and I was in the Kingdom Hall from that age. I remember I gave my first Bible reading. You remember from the Theocratic Ministry School, I gave my first Bible reading at the age of five and a half, going on six. And people go, when you say that today, people go, "Ooh, ah," but as a person who was in it, how from birth you're groomed. And if you're a male, you're groomed to be a public speaker because you're expected to go on and become a minister, a servant, elder, and perhaps something else. And so that training was there. And to be honest, if I have to say anything good came out of my time as a Jehovah's Witness, is that they trained me to be able to teach people, to be able to speak publicly in front of large groups and not, you know, fall apart, and to not be intimidated. And I carry that with me throughout my working career up until today. So that was kind of how it started.
Mhm. And I agree with everything you said. First of all, most of the XJW men I've talked to say the same thing,
Mhm.
that if I got anything out of the org, it's that they taught me how to speak. And for a lot of us, and myself included, that was helpful to me on a secular level with my career because I'm able to present things and talk about things and make outlines for things. And
Right.
the one book for all the stuff that Watchtower has published that has no value at all whatsoever because it changes every other weekend. That one book that I will never have anything bad to say about is the Theocratic Ministry School Guidebook.
Yeah,
It was fantastic. It would
it was.
teach you how to speak, everything you needed to know. Anyone who studied that book, if you just took the religious part out of it, uh, and used that, would be a fantastic speaker. So that's a good thing. I
Mhm.
was a little bit older than you when I first gave my first Bible reading, but I did have to step on the little wooden box
Yeah.
to be, and I still couldn't see over the over the podium.
I was so
So you were
disappointed because I couldn't use the podium. I wasn't tall enough. So
I don't know why they put me behind it. I couldn't barely see over it, but whatever. And I remember I wore a corduroy jacket with patches. That
Mhm.
was the thing in the day. So I don't know what witnesses have never really had a sense of style, and I certainly didn't. So, and I still don't. If it wasn't for Beth, I would look homeless all the time. So,
But
so growing up in the 60s and the 70s, what are your earliest memories of the religion other than giving the talk? Like, was there anything about it that you felt positive about? Was there anything you didn't like about it growing up in it? What was the thing?
I think the thing that stood out the most, excuse me, from that time, my early time, was school. And you probably know where I'm going with this because as a Jehovah's Witness in school, your school experience is very, very different from all the other kids. Um, no birthday parties, no saluting the flag, no joining any sports or things of that sort. And back then, well, kids are kids today still. You took a lot of guff for that. I got picked on all the time. And so, kids thought you were, easy pushover. You'd get bullied and stuff like that. The teachers even looked at you sideways when you didn't stand up to salute the flag, or when if they had a birthday party and you had to go to it. I remember having to go to another classroom for a class that wasn't having the birthday party while that was going on to be excused, and it didn't feel good. It didn't feel great, but I was being taught that this is the truth, and that's all false religion. Couldn't explain it yet, but I knew it was false religion. That's what I was told, and so you just kind of went with the program. I remember that distinctly. I also, believe it or not, I remember going to, of course, the Kingdom Hall, going to assemblies. We used to. I lived in New York City at the time, so we used to go to the Bliss Assembly Hall in Long Island City. which was the first assembly hall the witnesses ever had. And I remember that place used to terrify me because it was a renovated movie theater that was built on the motif of an Egyptian temple. And it had all the eagles, and on the walls they had these four kind of sarcophagi, and guys standing like this with these lanterns, and it used to terrify me as a kid. So I never forgot that place. But I remember those assemblies. I remember long district conventions that went on for days. That started. We were at Yankee Stadium, places like that. They started in the morning. You had a meal break, and then it went on some more. You had a evening meal break, and then it went into the evening. And those conventions at that time were running almost about a week. And then little by little they started to calm down. So those were big things for me. Of specific note for me, of course, during that time. And I'm surprised at how well I remember it. I'm not going to say how old I am, but I'm surprised how well I remember all of that, how clearly it resonates with me, in terms of the ramp up and the work up to 1975. Everything was, kind of, looking forward. What does 1975 bring? Why are you looking forward to 1975? The Charles Sonnotco quote from the district convention: "Stay alive to 75." And that was really, it was an exciting time, but as a youngster, because I was still quite young at the time, it was pretty frightening because you probably remember. Do you remember the Paradise book, the
Hmm.
Orange Paradise book
Yeah,
with those?
that was right before my time, but my
Okay,
dad had all the literature, and yes, I read a lot of the older stuff, so yeah, I'm familiar.
okay, and well, the Paradise book had that horrific depiction of Armageddon, with everything on fire, and things coming out of the sky, and people screaming, and things of that nature. And even as a Jehovah's Witness, you'd believe that, well, we were going to walk right through that, but it was still a kind of frightening concept for a young person. And so, those things stood out very, very much so. But what was really impactful for me was 1975, everything leading up to it, and what happened when it didn't happen.
So what you're telling me is Watchtower trying to gaslight everybody and saying, "Oh, it's just a few people, and this guy." You actually experienced what all the XJW say is true. No, they were seriously pushing 1975 on the ground, even if in the publication it didn't specifically say the end was coming in 75. That was the temperature of the room at the time. Is that correct?
It was definitely the temperature, and even as I was listening to you, kind of say that, it still to this day kind of stirs up feelings.
Mm.
Because I remember, I was there. I was there. So it's not like it's some part of history where someone's talking about it and it's just kind of abstract. Well, that's their recollection. No, I was there. I know what was said. I know what was not said. I know how people were acting. I remember some information in the Kingdom Ministry, and they were talking about brothers and sisters who were selling their businesses and things of that nature to go into the pioneer ministry, and it made the comment, what more fitting way to finish out the last few months of this old system of things. I remember that distinctly. I also remember sitting in the Kingdom Hall in one of the service meetings, and this also appeared in one of the magazines, that where they specifically said, "Young people, you need to accept the fact that you will never grow old in this system, and that you will never achieve any of the goals or things of that nature that this world may set for you." All right, I remember that. And by the way, I have grandchildren now. Okay. So much for not growing old. I get the reminders every time I try to get out of bed in the morning that yeah, that part didn't happen the way you said it. Um, I remember being at the district convention in 1974, and as you remember, one of the highlights of every district convention is the closing talk, the last talk. where they do a summary of what the program was about, the highlights and so forth. And what we're always waiting for is what are the plans for next year's conventions? And in 1974, the final talk came. The brother gave the talk ended, and we all looked at each other because there was no mention of conventions for 1975.
Mm.
And as the year progressed, we used to always get around the October or November Awake magazine, or Watchtower Awake magazine. I forget which one it appeared in, but the announcements for the next year's conventions with the dates and the locations and things of that nature. But that didn't happen in 1974. And
Mm.
in fact, there was no word of district conventions in 1975 until the spring. That was when they finally came out and I guess realized we better do something. Folks were expecting something.
Right.
And so hastily they put together these conventions, and I remember that. So
I did not know that. So again, this is why I wanted to talk to you. I did not know that in 74 they didn't put the schedule like
they
they
did
always
not.
did. Because they did. I remember that when I was younger, you would always get the schedule and all that.
Hmm.
And yeah, that address at the end where they would tell you what's going to happen. And no, that's very telling. So again, Watchtower can gaslight, 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 but like living proof. No, you guys really were pushing that
Yeah,
this was it. Yeah, this
and
was it. So
that's the
how did you
part that
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry I interrupted you. That
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
you mentioned gaslighting, and that was the part that really stuck with me.
Hmm.
And even though I stayed in the organization for years, years afterwards, far longer than I should have, I remember when the magazine came out, the Watchtower, and it was actually a Watchtower study, and one of the comments, I forget the exact quote. It's all in my library, which is stored away right now. But it basically asks the question: are you struggling with unrealized expectations? And the way they worded it was that some folks may have gotten a little bit caught up and got and maybe assumed too much or read too deeply into things that they may have read or the like. And when I saw that, it made me mad. It made me mad because, again, wasn't an older person yet. I was still a young person, but old enough to know when, yeah, that's not true. That's not what happened. And it made me really angry because, again, I was there. I remember. So to come a couple of months later and say that, we never said those, we never implied those things, it really infuriated me. It wasn't until some 5 years later that they kind of printed a half-hearted apology, and saying that we may have, gotten people's expectations up by some things that may have been written or what have you, and the like. So, but that was like too little, too late for a lot of folks.
Hmm. So you were upset by it, but you were still young. You stayed in it, but based on what happened later that you told me about, you still believed. So if you remember, like, what was it? How is it that you could compartmentalize the anger about what they did and not apologizing for it and all that with the fact that you still believed that it was God's organization? Like, how did you carry those two things at the same time?
Um, Jehovah's Witnesses are very good at compartmentalizing, and to be a Jehovah's Witness, you have to. You have to compartmentalize because you have to be able to take your logical mind and put it to the side at times or often to be able to accept what you're being told is the truth. And that we don't understand everything. Jehovah knows what's best for us, and the like. And then the other part of that is where are you going to go? And for anyone who isn't familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses live in a very insular community. Your entire community is the congregation. you don't make friends with individuals who are not Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you do, people are looking at you sideways, and that can create problems for you. So you always accept the fact that, well, Jehovah will set things straight at the appropriate timing, and you're always fed that. You're always fed that. Um, it's interesting how today they've totally gone by that and now go as far as to say that we don't have to apologize if we make a mistake or get it wrong. We don't necessarily get it right, which I thought was wow. That says a lot about what they think about themselves and what they think about the rank and file Jehovah's Witness. So yeah, so though, so you compartmentalize, you put it to the
Mhm.
side. Jehovah will set things straight in the appropriate time. In the meantime, I have to continue to do the things I'm supposed to do so that I can possibly be delivered in the day of his judgment. And I say that because remember, Jehovah's Witnesses also never know if they're saved because they use that
Yeah.
scripture where it says that probably, and they've changed that language. So, and I struggle with that, especially in later years, because to me that's like saying, so I can do all these things I'm supposed to do as a Jehovah's Witness, and we'll talk about like the things I was exposed to. um, I can do all those things, live, the right kind of life, pioneer, be elder, circuit over whatever. And at the very, very end, Jehovah God can still say, "Oh no, so sorry, but thanks for playing." You know,
Yeah.
and I struggled with that. I struggled with that.
Definitely feel that same experience, though I did not live through the 1975 situation. There were other things that happened where you had to just shove it down, shove it down, shove it down, even though you disagree with it. Jehovah will make it right in his due time, blah, blah, blah. But to your other point, and this is one of those things you just don't think about until after you leave. After I left and I look back, I'm like, wait a minute. They used to quote that scripture where Peter says, Whom shall we go away to, Lord?
Yeah,
He's talking about Jesus,
Jesus, that's
but the
right.
Watchtower applied it to themselves as
Yes.
if, they co-opted. And but that, we talked a little bit about that before
Mhm.
I started recording. They're one of the biggest, if you are still a believing Christian, one of the biggest affronts to biblical Christianity is Watchtower's claim that Jesus is not your mediator,
Yes.
unless you're one of the 144,000. And that also has helped a lot of people to leave. So they would just co-op, co-op, co-op. So you had to look to them. You were really looking to Watchtower for your salvation. But like you said, that was still a probably. And even if you made it through Armageddon, you still weren't home free
That's
because
true.
they taught that at the end of the 1,000 year reign,
1,000-year
Satan
reign.
would be
That's
let loose
right.
for a little while, and you got to do it again. I'm like, it never ends. And
Yeah.
all of that I came to realize from a psychological perspective after they left. I left. Oh, it's because they need to keep you completely lacking security, so you latch onto them for security.
Hmm.
If you feel personally secure with God, with your spirituality, with all that, well, guess what? Your church might be helpful, right? You might choose to stay there because you like the community, you agree with what they teach, whatever, but you don't need them. And the same way that Watchtower needs you to need them so they can maintain power and
Yes.
control.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, right there with you, right there with you. So, after the 75 thing, did you ever talk to anybody else about your doubts about that and your anger about that, or did you just swallow it and leave it alone?
Absolutely not. Uh, that would have been your just writing yourself off.
Mm,
You would have had elders at the door wanting to talk to you about these things and wanting to see if you're right in the right mind and if you're a threat or a danger.
mhm.
So yeah, you suppressed it. You just suppressed that. And I know today there are in every kingdom hall there are witnesses sitting up in the kingdom hall. We call them PMOs, right? Physically in, mentally out. And they're sitting there and they're saying, I just no, this is no. But for various reasons. One, like I mentioned, they make the cost for leaving so high. There's also folks who are dealing with the sunk cost fallacy. you know,
Hmm.
put so much time in. I've given my life to this. I've given everything. I have nothing. What am I going to do? So there's no point to leaving now. I'm in my twilight years. And so for all those reasons. So no, I didn't say anything to anyone.
Not surprised. And again, that's another control feature, right? Because we all knew if you expressed doubt, they would come knocking
Oh
to
yeah,
see what was wrong with you, which means you never hear that other people agree with your doubts. So
exactly.
you feel utterly alone, like you're the oddball, right? Everybody else believes everything. Why can't I? Right. So yeah, no, it's genius and it's evil,
Yeah,
right? It's genius in that they figured out how to control people so well, and it lasted for so long until the birth of the internet, when it was very easy to find out
yeah.
all the problems, not just with the religions, but all the things that people who left had said.
Yes.
You could never talk to a disfellowship person in the 80s, 90s, right? You never would dare. But when the internet came along, in the darkness of your
Mm.
room, you could,
Right.
search and find and then read something. You may not even read it knowing that person used to be a witness, and you find out farther down, but it's too late now. Everything they said before that made sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now that crack you were talking about
Yeah.
is there.
Yeah.
It's a
Exactly.
different world we live in now. It's a different world. In some ways, it's definitely uh, less homogenous because of that, right? Media can't control narratives as easily as they used
Right.
to.
Right.
But that also means that groups like the Watchtower cannot hold on to people like they used to, because we're just a couple of keystrokes away to figure out what are these people really about.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So you grew up in it, you swallowed the doubts, you didn't talk to anybody about it. But your professional career, it's another reason I wanted to talk to you. So, what did you get into? How did that turn out? Like, what schooling did you get for it? Just tell us a little bit about the professional path you took. And then I want to sidebar about you
Mhm.
when you turned 18. But first, what about your career?
So, early on, my career wasn't much to speak of, for obvious reasons. You know, as Jehovah's Witnesses, you didn't go to college, so that limited options. But our training as Jehovah's Witnesses did work to our into our advantage because you had a good work ethic, you were honest, you were reliable, you could communicate well, and all of those things allowed me to continue to kind of move along in my career over the years. When I first started out, I was just doing, not menial work, but kind of entry level work. But over time, I my career progressed, and I got into initially training and development. I became a training instructor. Jehovah's Witness teacher, training instructor, right? Perfect fit, and that worked suited me really really well, and that allowed me to kind of grow in my the company that I was in, and that kind of opened the door over time for me to get into the human resources area. And that I didn't know it at the time, but there are various disciplines of human resources. And of course, you have your payroll folks. You have what you call HR generalists. Kind of they do a little bit of everything. But then you have pockets as well, which is employee relations, which encompasses doing investigation and things of that nature. And that was the major portion of my career, doing human resources work, but with a heavy spin on various types of investigations or dealing with basically you're the person that gets involved when something goes horribly wrong. And you need to find out what went wrong, who was involved, was it avoidable, and if not, what do we do about it? And that ended up with sometimes people no longer being with the organization after that. And so it taught me a lot of things in terms of how I listen to people, how I talk with people. I listen very carefully to what people say. I also listen very carefully to what they don't say. uh, and my boys hated it. My sons, they hated it because whenever they got in trouble, I would just kind of ask them general questions, really innocuous questions, and they'll answer them, and then they're not realizing that with every answer you're kind of tightening things in. And then when you got them to a point that they've now backed themselves into a position or a statement, then you hit them with, so now help me understand. And they knew when you said that, it was over. it was over. And so that helped me in terms of just being inquisitive, but also listening a lot to letting people talk, uh, and and
Hmm.
and it kind of went from there.
And for context, about how old are you at this point?
I am 62.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I meant when you were
Oh,
in that line of work. No, that's
oh,
fine. So
oh,
you just told on yourself though,
yeah,
because
I
you said
know,
you didn't
right?
want people to know.
Yeah. Well,
In the
um,
line of work, like where in
I was in my late 20s, getting to my early 30s.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now, before I ask you the next question, I want to sidebar when you were 18. You said you were married very young, and we're not going to go into any detail about that. It's just something you said about it. Let me see. I wrote it down that I wanted to ask you. You said something to the effect that people at 18 felt obligated to get married.
Hmm.
And I just want you to talk about that because I know from my growing up as a witness, that was very true. There's a lot of pressure to get married young or never at all, either
Right,
one of the two,
right.
because you could devote your life to God and be the spiritual eunuch or whatever and go out in service all the time. So, what was that pressure like when it came to get married when you were so young?
Yeah, for those who don't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses, is so their view of adulthood or growing into adulthood and how it should be dealt with is very, very different from the real world. There is a lot of pressure on Jehovah's Witnesses from a young age to think as they get older. Uh, if you become attracted to somebody, that you have to be very, very intentional about what you're going to do. So Jehovah's Witnesses don't just date, right? They don't just date. But if they're going to date, they are dating with a purpose and the expectations that if they're dating, then they should be expected to be getting married. And that's because of various things, their views on sexuality and so forth. They place constraints on so many aspects of people's lives. I remember as a young person reading studying the youth book. Remember that the red youth book,
Hmm.
and they had a whole section in there on masturbation and how it was the horrible sin it was, and if a young person got into that, which young person doesn't, but
Exactly.
it was going to cost you.
Hmm.
At that point you could get reproved, if not worse, in the congregation. And so with all that repression and suppression, Jehovah's Witnesses get married like in certain other high control religions at a very, very young age. But here's the thing, you know, at the age of 18, what do you know about relationships? You're still trying to figure out, do I want to wear the blue shirt or the white shirt tomorrow?
Right,
And you're
right.
expected to go into this thing of a marriage, which is a lifelong commitment. And of course, I'm all for marriage, but at that age, you can't before the age of 18, you can't sign a contract. You can't enter into any business arrangements or things of that sort. You can't sign up for military service or the like. But you're expected to make a commitment for life to a person that when you're still trying to figure out who you are, you know.
Hmm.
So as a result, yeah, we went to a lot of weddings. Went to a lot of weddings. Young people that got married, and of the ones that I knew, very few of them in the success were successful, and they just weren't.
That that is such the point to take from that because Watchtower used to brag about how low their divorce rate was. And when I found out what it really is, and that it actually is not any better than people, it's the same. It's basically the same, which makes sense because if you get married that young, you don't know who you are. When you find out who you are and you look at the person that you married when you were still a child,
Right?
and you're like, we don't have the compatibility. And I so many times in the hall, and I never thought about it again until after you leave. Hindsight is definitely 2020.
And
I
in
would think
color.
about all, yeah, and yeah, I would think about the couples who were married for a long time, and I would like see the brother. I'm like, "Where's your wife?" I'd see the sister. Where's her husband? They didn't always sit together.
No,
They were often off doing their own. They didn't go out in service all the time. Sometimes because they had to make a show of the family or whatever.
right.
But most of the time, so much of what they did was separate. And I'm well, that just makes sense because you were married as a child. You're not really compatible. You're trying to stick it out because you think God, Watchtowers, told you you had to do that.
Mhm.
And it's just a disaster. It's a disaster for everybody involved. And they lie about it and say, no, our divorce rate's really low. No, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
I knew a married couple, and it kind of became common knowledge. This was a married couple for many, many years. And they slept in different rooms.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
so you talk about having those separate lives, and they lived in
Yeah.
separate rooms in the house.
The presiding overseer of the congregation I was in Louisiana, old Cajun guy, his wife, they were in their late 70s back in the mid to late 90s. His wife did not like him at all. And it was all one of those unspoken things that we all knew. She did not like him at all. And they were my neighbors. So I would go to their house sometimes. She was an amazing cook. You can imagine Cajun, like my last name, Leger Cajun. Like I love to eat at their house. She's
Mhm.
phenomenal. He had his own bedroom. And it wasn't because there was any logical reason why that, like I knew one guy had sleep apnea really bad. So, he makes
Right,
enormous amounts of noise. She can't. That's a physical thing. That I understand.
right.
No, she just didn't like him. So she came down into another room. Like today, if it's like that, why are you married? But then
Right.
no, no, you did not, come what may, you do not break the bond. All right.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny because sometimes you get a little peek into people's lives outside of the Kingdom Hall, and it wasn't what you expected. I mean, there were a couple of times I went to some folks' houses and the brothers, and some of these were elders, and they're talking to their wife, and I'm like, you're really kind of a jerk, you know. And it's like,
Yes.
but at the Kingdom Hall, they put on this whole different face, and it's like,
Mm.
wow. So,
It's true. You're not wrong. So I wanted to take that sidebar because, like so many, you had gotten married super young, and I get it. And it was, of course, didn't turn out. You're remarried now, right?
yes, I am.
Yeah. So that's very common. Me too, for the same reason. It just this happens, right? So back to the investigator thing. So you had this job that your children hated because you could like get them down into that to admit the thing they don't want to tell you, which is that's an amazing skill to have as a parent. I have two teenagers. Uh, but you're in the religion. You're taught to ask all the right questions to get at the truth because you had to, because it was your job. But did you apply that skill to what they said at the Kingdom Hall, or was it all just nope, compartmentalized, compartmentalized? I can't ask questions about that.
It was very, very compartmentalized. It doesn't mean it was a cakewalk. It's because you still have, you have that partition, but the thoughts on the other side are banging on the partition saying, hey.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you have to constantly keep suppressing, suppressing, suppressing. And the primary way that well, I can only speak for myself, but I think it's true in a lot of cases with Jehovah's Witnesses, is that the primary way that you keep that at bay is that you keep busy in the organization, because that was the fix
Hmm.
for everything, right? That was the fix for everything. If you're having doubts, oh, you need to study more Watchtower publications. If you're having questions, what have you, talk to the elders. Do this. Spend more time in the field ministry. Those, that hamster wheel effect that keeps you busy, busy, busy. And if you're busy enough on keeping that wheel moving, you're not listening to the knocking at the door, that you closed. And so I did that. I did that. And I know for a fact that there were a number of folks in the congregation who were doing the same. Um,
Hmm.
you could always kind of tell who they were, because they'd fade in, they'd fade out, or they did just what was required not to be on the elders' radar. So whether that's the number of hours they're spending in the field ministry, or conducting Bible studies, or those sorts of things, you just keep trying to suppress it, and you become very, very good at it. But eventually it breaks through.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that completely. Growing up, I had a friend of mine whose mom, and she told me this, and this, me with her son, like she told me, which is amazing to me now, and probably not appropriate for me being a teenager. And the mom's telling me this. She went to a therapist as a witness, which at the time, this is in the
Oh,
late
wow.
80s, early 90s, like you didn't
You
do,
didn't
but
do
she went
that.
anyway. And her husband was an elder a long time. So like this was everyone kind of got a twitch when she would talk about it. She went to a therapist and she said, and the therapist asked me, because for anxiety, therapist asked her, well, what do you do for fun? She's like, well, I read the Bible. I go out in the field ministry. I go to the Kingdom Hall. And she's like, no, 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 no. What do you do for fun? She's like, I'm not saying those are bad things, but like, what do you do for fun? And it hit her. She doesn't do anything for fun. Like everything, her whole life was wrapped up in the Watchtower. And by the time I was out of the house and moved away, I found out later she stopped going to meetings. She wasn't acting. And there was always the excuse, well, it's her health, because she was in poor health. Oh, it's her health. She can't. There's always an excuse. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't think it
Yeah.
was her physical health.
Right.
I think she recognized her mental health was hurt, and I think she became a PMO. I don't know that, but I think she did because based on what I saw, because I was at this guy was my best friend. I was at his house every week because he lived 3 blocks from me. So what you're saying, so they keep you on that hamster wheel, hamster wheel, hamster wheel, so you never have the energy or the time to stop and ask
Right.
questions because that wakes you up.
Did you ever notice, because you mentioned something that caught my attention, did you ever notice how many sisters in the congregation had some sort of illness where they were just fibromyalgia was like the thing, you know?
It
Uh,
was.
it
It
was like
was.
every regular pioneer had it, the sisters in the congregation, elders' wives, and you had, I wondered about that. What was behind that? But as you get older, you realize all these things you suppress. My pastor has a saying that what's down in the well comes up in the bucket.
Oh, yeah, I like that. Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and you can only keep it down but so long, and it's going to find
Mm.
its way to manifest itself somehow in your health. And yeah, there were a lot of witnesses who were not well because of this constant stress they were under.
I mean, there's so many stress-related illnesses, and the brothers and sisters had them all. It was very common
Right.
to see that.
Right.
So,
But
well,
don't go
you
to a
get it now.
therapist.
Yeah, no, no. Now, of course, they changed their tune on that. But culturally, there's what they say in the Watchtower, and I don't know because I've been to the Kingdom Hall in years, but there's what they said, and there's what we knew was true. Like you
Exactly.
could read between the lines. The theocratic warfare, we knew that Watchtower would say things in order to appease the authorities, but the culture within the Kingdom Hall is very different. So
Yes.
I remember growing up and being told, don't ever go to a therapist, worldly wisdom, read the Bible, pray to Jehovah, blah, blah, blah. And so I just assumed that it was all over the Watchtower that you should not go to a therapist. But
Hmm.
as an activist who does videos now, when I would go to search, there's almost no Watchtower
No.
that specifically forbids you. I mean, I don't think I ever found one within at least going back to the 70s that forbids anyone from going to a therapist. But we all knew in the culture you don't go to a therapist. And I said in my recent video, I think that's why they get away with what they get away with in court.
Right.
Because what's on the printed page is one thing.
Right.
But what we
That's on
knew
the
the
platform.
culture was very different. And
Yes.
so there you go.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
my opinion. Yeah. Okay, so back on track here. It's a good sidebar though. So you have this job, the questions are banging against the wall, but you just keep suppressing them. You became a ministerial servant. When did that happen? How did that happen? And how did you feel about that given everything else?
So this is many, many years later. I became a ministerial servant, if I got it correctly, but it was in 2000. And leading up to that, I had become a regular auxiliary pioneer. So for those who don't know, a pioneer is they used to be called coal porters. in years ago. But a pioneer was a publisher who committed to spending a set number of hours, a minimum set number of hours in the ministry, whether that be going from door to door, conducting Bible studies, writing letters, making phone calls, what have you. That was their vocation. Regular pioneers, going back, I'm trying to remember the hours requirement back then. Um, Regular pioneers were doing about 120, somewhere in that range a month. And they usually supported themselves by working some menial side job, cleaning offices after hours or things of that nature. And these they were kind of seen as the cream of the crop in the congregation, because they're full time in the ministry as it was seen. An auxiliary pioneer was a person who committed also, but to a lesser amount. So at the time that I became a regular auxiliary pioneer, the hours requirement was 60 hours a month. So that was, again, conducting Bible studies, going from door to door, um, uh, uh, making phone calls, writing letters, things of that nature. By the way, as much, and I was a regular pioneer, and I hated knocking on doors. I hated knocking on doors. I can't tell you, I'm going to tell myself now, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that's done it. The phantom door ring, where you kind of lightly touch the doorbell, just light enough
Yep.
that it looks convincing, but it doesn't actually ring the doorbell because you just don't want that person to come to the door. And if you did ring the doorbell, a lot of times you would just praying, just don't let them come to the door. Don't let them come to the door. But you had to, do all the motions. But I did that because it was kind of expected. You're a male in the congregation, so you're supposed to be setting an example, especially for the younger people and the like. And as a ministerial servant, it also reflected well on the congregation, and it doesn't hurt your stock value either when it comes to how you're seen as a as a spiritually strong member of the congregation. And so I did that for quite a number of years. And it's funny how even after leaving, as time went on, we saw they started to reduce the hours, sequentially, in years, so that it was practically down to nothing. And now they don't have time reporting requirements at all. And even as an XJW, it's like, wow, really? All those years, I did that, and now
Yep.
you're saying, never mind. you know,
Yep. Yep. The
um,
the pioneers and the auxiliary pioneers, they still have requirements,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
very much remember if you didn't get when I was very young, 12 hours a month, you could not serve.
right,
And that eventually went down to 10.
right,
And then it went down to 8. And like you said, eventually they just stopped and now you check a box and like
yeah.
that's it. Yeah.
I
Very
think they,
different.
they stopped that reporting requirement because the numbers were going down, and Watchtower they loved putting out that annual report, every
Hmm.
and the numbers weren't looking good, and it got to a point where you couldn't manipulate it enough to put it over on people. So the best thing to do was just stop with the annual report and
Yeah.
stop the hours
Just stop.
reporting requirement. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard different theories about it. I've heard what you're saying, like, yeah, it kept looking worse, so they eventually stopped doing it. And they claimed it was for some scriptural or kindness on their part. Another reason I heard it was said, and again, I don't know for sure, but it's interesting if it's true, that in some parts of Europe, you can't clock time without getting paid.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And so if you're turning in a time slip, you have to be compensated or
Hmm.
the law is being broken. And the
Hmm.
claim is that, well, because Watchtower wasn't paying anybody
Yeah.
and they weren't signing up as like official legal volunteers, which you can do that. You can take a vow of poverty, which pioneers
Right.
do. You
Right.
can take the vow of poverty and not get paid, but you can't just clock time and not get
Yeah.
paid. And so they had to stop it because it was such a legal quagmire that they were going to put themselves in.
I did hear that
Yeah.
when it first came about, when they were making those changes, that there was, I
Hmm.
think, something going over in Europe,
Yeah.
where they had to make some changes to that.
Yeah,
So
that's what and if anyone has any like information about that, feel free to comment about it because I don't know that for sure. And I'm just saying, things that I've heard, but it would make sense if it's true, but I don't know for a
Mhm.
fact that it is. But the numbers definitely started to get worse, so they wouldn't have kept lowering the requirements for everybody, pioneers, auxiliary pioneers, publishers who serve, like all that. They just kept bringing it down, down, down.
Well, I mean, I think it's safe to say that we know that the Watchtower doesn't do anything that doesn't benefit them. So
100%.
so there had to be something in it for them to
Hmm.
make that change and make that adjustment. And so I totally believe that's to be the case.
Yeah. Yep, it would make sense. Okay, so you're a servant, you become the accounts servant. And I'm very interested in this, but at this point, because I see the stock ticker in your background over there, had you had a background in finance at this point? You were in the HR, you were a trainer, but did your job give you any like financial background or training or anything like that when you became the account servant?
Not to the extent of being like an accountant or anything of that nature, but it did
Okay.
it did get me involved because many of the investigations that I had to work on involved someone doing something unethical on a monetary basis. Most of my career was spent in, like I said, financial services, so which is heavily regulated. And when your company has a lot of money, people are always trying to find ways to get it. You know, so I spent time working on those sorts of cases. Oftentimes, working with someone who was, for example, a full financial person, but they're on one side of the house, and I had the accountability side of it. So we worked hand in hand, and then I would be one of the people that would deal with the person, in terms of consequences. Do you still work for us any longer? Or the like. So it gave me insight into how money moved around and how organizations operated, how companies functioned. I worked for, a couple of well-known companies. If I mention them, you'd know who they all are. And also went through a number of mergers and acquisitions. And when you go through that, you just learn stuff by having to rub shoulders with, everything that happens in that process. And so it gave me insight into kind of seeing. It's when I first began to start seeing Watchtower in a different light. Um,
That's what I want to get into next. So you become the account servant, and in the overview that you sent me, you said you begin to see the religion as a business. So tell us that story. Like, how did that happen? What were you seeing? What was going on?
well, one of the first things that surprised me was how we handle the congregation contributions. And I just assumed that we would collect the contributions, and that it went into the congregation bank account, and that would be used to help take care of the Kingdom Hall and stuff like that. And I knew a portion of it went to Watchtower. And then when I became the account servant, I was responsible for, of course, handling the bank account, um, collecting, taking in the contributions, uh, making the payments for different, utilities, things of that sort, writing those checks, getting those checks written out, and also sending off to Watchtower what was due to them. And the first thing it's nothing today, but the first thing that caught me off, that surprised me was that they had an automated system for that, wherein you actually call the phone number, and it's like you put in your congregation number, and it asks you to break out how much you're going to be sending to Watchtower. What portion is for the worldwide preaching work? What portion is for the Kingdom Hall Fund, or any other extemporaneous collection that they were doing? And you made that phone call, and that's all you did. Watchtower then pulled the money automatically from the congregation's
Mm.
bank account. Um, that kind of surprised me, because I was like, huh, you know, this is like very, very corporate, like in terms of how organizations handle things like that. Now it's, of course, the way business is done, but early on it was really unusual. Um, and then I started to it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that. I also got a chance to do some relief work. So I'm going to take a quick left turn here, but this was eye-opening too, doing some relief work following some storms that happened. And we went out to help brothers and sisters who had some damage to their homes. And of course, I was excited to be a part of that. Proud to have my hard hat with the Watchtower logo on the front of it. And 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 before we went ahead and did the work, the brother and sister who owned the home had to sign some paperwork. And I was like, "Hmm, what's that about?" We just go in and fix the windows, repair, whatever has been damaged or what have you. But it was a document that allowed them to subrogate, basically. So the brothers and sisters had to agree that we'll go ahead and do this work on the house, but if you receive anything in the way of insurance, payments, what have you, you have to pay that back. And that was a huh for me.
You were the first I've heard that and I've heard it and I've heard it, but I've never actually talked to someone who said, yes, I was there. This is what they did.
Yeah.
So I'm very glad because you didn't mention that little aside earlier. So I'm so glad you're saying that because that puts a nail in that. But I've been wondering, was that really true? So you
Yeah.
saw the paperwork
Oh,
that
it's
said that
true.
that
It's
was
true. Yeah, there's an
yeah.
actual form that was used for that.
Huh.
It looked like every other Watchtower form. you know, we know what they look like, right? But yeah,
How did
that's
you
a.
feel about that when you saw that?
I was surprised. I was really surprised. Um, and it kind of stuck me. If that, it was like that doesn't feel right, because it was kind of like your first peek behind the curtain.
Hmm.
Your first
Hmm.
peek behind the curtain. It's like, things are not all that I thought they were, you know. Um, so yeah, it didn't quite set well with me. But again, you suppress it. It's the way it's done. So we worked on their house, a few others, and of course we did the little kind of uh, press release kind of thing where there was a neighbor next door who wasn't a witness who had a broken window. We fixed that and sang our praises about it later on and how wonderful we are that we help not just Jehovah's Witnesses but non-witnesses too. But so that it's kind of like how there's I was saying there's no one thing, but you start stacking little things up and it starts forming a picture for you. Um, the other part that really struck me and that really kind of caught my attention was and I don't want to get too far ahead, so stop me if I'm going too far if it's something you want to go on later on, but it had to do with what's now known as the Great Kingdom Hall grab of the early 2000s.
Right, right.
Um, that was very eye-opening for me. It was, and I think for others too, but they just suppressed it. They just suppressed it. And for anyone who's not familiar with what that was about, I mean, can I go into that here?
Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
So when kingdom halls are built, of course, usually a congregation doesn't have the money to build it all from the ground up, but they come up with a deposit and the Watchtower Society, the Watchtower, one of its organizations, would fund the construction of the Kingdom Hall, and Kingdom Hall was constructed over maybe a period of months, weeks, or even days at one point, which turned out to be a really bad business idea. But anyway, and so as a result of that, the congregation had a mortgage, and it's part of my duties. In addition to paying the getting the regular utilities paid, I had to also send off the amount that was due to the Watchtower for the congregation mortgage. So in the early 2000s, I forget the exact year, so I don't want to lie and say that, but I remember we received a letter that was to be read to the congregation, and the letter basically said that there was such a need for kingdom halls that society had come up with a simplified, better arrangement to be able to pool resources so that they could build kingdom halls. A lot of them quick builds, some of them very simplified, in different parts of the world. And to be able to make that happen, the society was forgiving the mortgages that the congregations may have had on their kingdom hall. And we'll be using those funds for for this building work. And everyone's like, oh, that's wonderful, that's great, that's incredible. It's like, what a loving arrangement. It's funny thing about high control groups is how they can have a, I've heard this analogy, they can have the boot on the back of your neck, and they let up on it a little bit and you're grateful. Oh, what, how wonderful of them, and so everyone was singing the praises. Oh, this is wonderful. We're going to have kingdom halls everywhere, and this is going to be such a wonderful thing. What the congregation didn't see was the page 2 of that letter. And the reason I know this is because I was the account servant. I read the letter to the congregation. What was on page 2 were instructions to the elders, which advised the elders that in the following month, that during one of the service meetings, they were to send around slips of paper to the heads of household of every of every family, and ask the head of household to write down a figure. It was non-binding, but to write down a figure that they felt that their family could contribute on a monthly basis. Sounds like tithing, but anyway, I digress. And so that what was done. But here's the interesting part that was also on page 2, that the elders should see to it that the total amount of donations, voluntary monthly donations that were going to be sent in, would be no less than the amount of the previous mortgage payment.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember the slip of paper, but I was not privy to that when it
Yes.
happened.
Yes. Yes. Which meant, and of course, it went over the head of a lot of people in the congregation. But if you were a homeowner, you knew what this meant. Because what it basically meant was that, okay, your mortgage is forgiven, but now you're locked into this perpetual monthly donation and the same amount of your congregation's Kingdom Hall mortgage payment, which means you are going to be paying for your Kingdom Hall in perpetuity. Your mortgage will never go away. That didn't set well with a lot of brothers and sisters. But in true JW fashion, they suppressed it and they went along with it.
Mm,
It was also in the context of that I began to learn about all of the different corporations and trusts and organizations that the society has, that by their name you would never have any idea it has anything to do with Watchtower or Jehovah's Witnesses. And and I was paying attention to that because this was also, the early 2000s was on the heels of when the rumbling started to happen around child sex abuse around CSA. That was like in the late 90s, and it was started rumbling, and now they had all these different organizations and trusts and investment firms and the like. And and what one of the first things that caught me was when we got the announcement that we now had this new organization called the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, whereas heretofore we just knew Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And they separated it so that the Christian Congregation of Jehovah, the CCJW, were all these named individuals who no one knew, you know. But on the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses side, it was the governing body and the like, and the individuals that we knew at Bethel and so forth. And immediately when I started seeing this, there was a bell that went off in my head that this is kind of a shell game. It's kind of a hide the assets, separate. They wanted to separate the religious order from the business end, so that the decisions that were affecting the people, the congregation, the publishers, and so forth, that were being made by the religious order, could not be held against them in the sense that it would impact the assets of the legal corporations. And that's what
So
I
if
learned.
I'm understanding this right, what you're saying is, at least it appeared this way to you, if someone was a victim of CSA and sued, they would be suing the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses and could not
Yes,
touch the assets of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society.
exactly, exactly.
Gotcha.
Or
Gotcha.
there is other
Gotcha.
organizations.
Whatever.
Um,
Yeah. Whatever the other ones are.
and I had seen, having, like I said, working in financial services, I had been, like I said, in organizations where we merged or where we did acquisitions, and that's one of the first things you do. You separate the risk, and you make sure you protect the assets, and so that's how the organization operates today. It still operates that way. By one count, I was speaking with someone who has spent some time very, very close to the organization, and at the time that we last spoke, they said that the Watchtower Society, or what I used Watchtower as the whole, but has some 1,100 corporations and trusts that they operate under that we know of,
Wow.
and that number is continuing to grow. And they're still taking steps, it seems like even now, to even separate the members of the governing body, move them as far away from the part of the organization that controls the assets, the property, the resource, all of that, to separate them so that when people sue the Jehovah's Witnesses for alienation of their family or what have you, it doesn't. You can only sue the CCJW, but you can't go after the other organizations because, one, who are they? And they're two different entities that operate supposedly independent of one another.
Hmm. So, do you think, and I don't know what your background is on this, I'm trying to remember, there's a term for it. Is it piercing the veil where you can, two companies try to separate themselves for the purpose of that protection, but there are ways if you can prove, I don't know if it's fraud or whatever, that you can connect them back. Do you think that, what's your thinking on that? Is that possible, or has Watchtower done this for far too long that they can't connect those anymore? I'm not an attorney. I've just
Yeah,
heard that
yeah,
phrase, and because I've ran a business for 20 years, and I was told by my, legal counsel who set it up, the LLC and everything. They kind of explained it to me, but I'm not a legal, person. So,
yeah. I'm not legal either, but I have heard that phrase. And the one thing that you have to recognize is that when it comes to breaking down those sorts of things, the governments can be very, very creative about that.
mhm.
There's always something, because at some point the two pieces have to connect, right? It may not be an obvious one, but if you can find out that, well, this person that reports to that person that reports to that person reports to them, then you can kind of break that down. And I believe that's starting to happen, which is why they're continuing to go about what they're doing and creating these new organizations and new corporations, that, like I said, at face value, you would never know has anything to do with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Gotcha, gotcha. So it seems, if I'm understanding, that the obfuscation of all these different corporations is meant to protect them as much as possible, even if it's not perfect, because as you say, if you jump down that rabbit hole far enough, you'll eventually connect pieces, but it's very difficult to do. Takes a
Right.
long time, costs a lot of money to do it, and maybe that will give them some kind of insulation from all the obvious lawsuits going on right now.
Agree. And through it all, I guess the pervasive thought that was with me through it all was that if we are Jehovah's organization, we are the only true religion, and he is going to protect us at Armageddon. Why the subterfuge? Why would we need to behave this way if Jehovah is for us? Because now we're looking like all the other companies, businesses that are out there that don't hide who they are. This is what they do, this is what they stand for. You may not like the product they manufacture, you may not like the countries they operate in, but they are who they are. So if we're Jehovah's true organization, spiritual warfare aside, because that's a whole other conversation, why would we need to do this?
Mm.
I struggled with that. And
Yeah, sure.
so, and that, I think that was kind of one of the things that kind of started pushing me over the edge in terms of making that decision that this really isn't the truth. Um,
So
so
that punched a hole in the partition that you were
it
talking
did.
about.
Well, yeah, because I could see through the hole.
Mhm. Right, right,
You
right,
know,
right.
I could see right through the hole. I knew it was on the other side, and
Hmm.
so and again, for me, it was like, why would we need to do this? That
Yeah.
really was going to begin.
To your earlier point, then I want to ask you about your early access to the Shepherd the Flock of God book. But to your earlier point about the insurance thing and the disaster relief work, my biggest issue with that isn't so much that they're asking witnesses to hand over any insurance if they should get it.
Mhm.
It's that they were so opaque about it.
Right,
We always were told and assumed we were going to volunteer to help our brothers and sisters and other people too sometimes when it made sense to do that out of the kindness of our hearts and out of Watchtower's pocketbook. That's what we were told.
right.
But as it turns out, that is not the case. That Watchtower wasn't just using funds that had been donated for disaster relief work or whatever to do these repairs. They were asking also to get compensated, if possible, by the witnesses, which that would not have gone over well with me at all because I'm like,
Yeah,
well, if we're volunteering and doing the work for free, and our donations were supposed to be paying for the materials that we're using to do the work with. Let the family keep the insurance money to help them get back
they're
on
gonna
their
need it.
feet.
Right, they're
They're
gonna
going
need
to
it.
need it. But they never told us that. It's the fact that they pretended to be this righteous, kind organization only to find out that, oh, that's only half the story. You're not hearing the other half. And that
Yeah.
learning, I didn't know that for sure about the disaster relief. I suspected it was probably true because I'd heard it so many times, but I didn't know for sure. And that kind of thing, after I left and looked back, just shake my head about that.
You hit it on the head because the reality is that, again, it's not the fact that they do it, but it's the fact that no one ever knew that they were doing that. Subrogation is nothing new. It happens all the time. You have a car accident, you go to the hospital, your health insurance company pays for all that, your procedures and stuff, surgeries and rehabilitation and everything else. And you get an attorney, you file a lawsuit, you win a lawsuit, your insurance company is going to want their money back. Okay. So
Hmm.
it happens all the time. But it's the fact that they put up this facade that, oh, but it's all of the goodness of our heart. Look what we're doing for our brothers. I mean, I think it was, I forget which governing body member it was, just on a recent video not too many months ago, patting themselves on the back because they spent $4 million last year in aid relief. And this is a multi-billion-dollar organization. And they're patting themselves on the back over 4 million. Um, it's and as a witness you're like, oh well, that's wonderful, see how we have the truth, nobody else is doing that. And then I left and I became a Christian and I realized, yeah, they are. And much more,
Yeah.
and so it all those things, once that veil starts to peel back a little bit, it just reveals more and more, and it starts coming a lot more fast and furious in terms of the awakening, I would think.
Yeah. No, for me, that was definitely the case. Once it cracked open enough for me to really deep dive into it, that was it. The house of cards just collapsed, just like
Yeah,
that. Did not take long. I mean, literally within the matter of like a week
yeah.
of reading, mentally, I was out. Like that
Oh
was
yeah,
it. It was
yeah,
over. It didn't take long. But it takes a long time to get hit hard enough for the crack to form.
yeah.
Once the crack is there, forget it. That crowbar goes in, it's coming off. That's it.
So
That's it.
to your point, so the crack was there because because I was a minister, so and because I was trying to do all the things I'm supposed to do to, to impress the elders, look good, be the good Christian brother I'm supposed to be in the congregation, it had me involved in things that the rank and file member is never ever going to see. And I think any former elder or minister or servant will tell you the same thing, that you're starting to see things now that you would have never known about, and that the congregation will still never know about unless they're on the internet like now.
Right, right.
Which is the beauty of the internet.
Hmm.
But yeah, once it happens, it starts to go back, very, very fast, and you start to be able to pick up things a lot faster.
For sure. One last question
Yeah,
from
sure.
the account servant
Hmm.
perspective, then I want to ask you about the Shepherd of the Flock of God book. I had heard from an elder, this was a long time ago, that if you see, like back when they were building Patterson, this is how far back this was. Uh, I remember they had the little like donation station set up in the Kingdom Hall, and it had a picture of what it was going to look like and all that stuff. And you would put money in there. Supposedly, or at least it gave the impression that every dime you put in there was going straight to Bill Patterson. Well, the elder I talked to, this is years ago, he's like, no, that is not the case. You put money in that box, it goes to Watchtower. Watchtower does whatever they want to with it. That box, that picture, that Patterson, that's just the advertisement to get you to put the money in. Did you find that to be the case? Is that the case?
Yeah, there was no real separation of the donation that you were sending into Watchtower.
So that's what I thought. I'm just wanted a second corroborative
Hmm.
voice on that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
good
it's
to know
not.
that that was actually because I don't like to say things that, look, I'm never going to have any kind words for Watchtower, but I don't want to lie about them. So what they do is bad enough. That is true. And we know it's true. I don't want to say things that aren't true about them. So I always like to double check with people who've been there and have some insider information. Did that happen? Because I was a servant for years, right on the border of being an elder like you.
Hmm.
Uh, but I was never the account servant. So
Hmm.
I didn't know
Hmm.
that. Okay, Shepherd the Flock of God, you got early access. I want to hear about
Yeah.
this and your reaction to that book because that was the thing.
So I didn't get to have it for a long time because the brother that let me see it wasn't supposed to let me see it. uh, but I guess the first thing that surprised me about it was, first of all, how detailed it was in terms of all sorts of scenarios you would never even think of, you know, and how everything was just, it was it wasn't a very spiritual book. Okay, let me just put it that way. I mean, yeah, like every other Watchtower publication, it's proof texted and has your verses here or there to support whatever point they're trying to make. But it wasn't like anything that you're getting guidance on how to counsel this person on this, what have you. But it was more an operations manual, for lack of a better phrase. um and and it was just it but it's very, very detailed in the different issues that it dealt with. And the elders, they lived by it, in terms of consult that book for everything. um I got to the when I got to the point about how they deal with wrongdoing, uh, and especially, like, things like immorality and so forth, and the specificity of the things that they were supposed to find out. you know um and I'd hear people talk about this on some of the YouTube videos. And when I hear them saying about the questions, the invasive questions and things of that nature, how sisters were questioned and how brothers were treated differently at times. And I'm like, yeah, it was in there. It was in there. And some of it, I'm not even going to say on online what it was, but some of it is like, that's just creepy. I mean,
Yeah.
why did you need to know that? It just didn't make sense. And although it was written in a way that these issues were to try to hopefully win that person back. It didn't seem like that was the top priority. It was about how do we nail this person so that we can disfellowship them, quickly if necessary. And then the process, they begin the process of coming back if they ever came back. So I remember the part about how if wrongdoing involved young people, how it's changed now, but how the parent wasn't in the room, you know, which that just it gets me mad just thinking about it right now, because can you imagine if you've ever sat in front of a committee, how intimidating that is. First of all, the person is there because they know that they messed up. So they're dealing with that guilt perhaps and everything else. And then you have three men who you really don't know, you know, um, who are questioning you and drilling you and asking you all these really, really personal, invasive questions. And based upon how you respond to those questions, they send you outside to talk about whether or not you're repentant or not, or whether you exhibited fruits that befit repentance, which probably prior to that meeting, you never even heard that term before. you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
but so the how buttoned up it was, and operational it was, and with all that came about later on with CSA and the like, and all, the blue envelope was a thing. It was definitely a thing. It was mentioned in that
Mm-hmm.
the book, um, and it again, it kind of helped me to see how there again, it was all about protecting the organization. And when I say protecting the organization, I don't mean it in the way that they say it, because they'll say it's about protecting and keeping Jehovah's house clean. Yeah, no. it's about it's about protecting the assets. If I can tell a quick story about
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
that caught my attention. This was happening around the same time as the Kingdom Hall grab. There was another letter that came to the congregation that the elder saw. Um, Kingdom halls are built in all different styles, based upon where they are in the country, where they are in the world. Some are, some are very, very basic. Some, if they were built some years ago, maybe a bit more ornate, little, nice touches to it. Some of them had, little watchtowers on them and stuff, and because we were proud of that, we were always proud of that. Um, and this was also one of the things that really helped me to start to see the business arm of this whole thing. There was a letter that came to the congregation that instructed the congregations that by a certain date, if your kingdom hall had any sort of watchtower motif, so the watchtower silhouette, okay. I used to live a couple of blocks from Kingdom Hall, that the front of the Kingdom Hall was actually built in the shape of the watchtower.
Mm.
Um, and of course, a lot of the signs had a watchtower emblem on it. If the Kingdom Hall had any watchtower motif inside or out, they had to be stripped from the building by a certain date. And when I saw that, I was like, this is hide the asset. They want to separate the asset. They want there to be no connection between Watchtower, who was getting sued, and the CCJW. And so, but if you have a big old building with a big old watchtower motif on the front, there you go. And I saw right through that. I never said a word, but I saw right through it, and that too was part of the beginning of the end, because I knew
Mm-hmm.
exactly what was happening. And again, why would they need to do that if they were Jehovah's people?
Yeah. Yeah. When you get out and you look back at all that, when you're in, you don't think about it because you believe that they're doing good, that they're God's people, they're the faithful slave, blah, blah. You don't attribute, even if you disagree
Yeah.
with something, which I did, you don't attribute malice or bad motives to why they're doing
No,
it.
you
And then you
don't.
get out and look back and you realize, no, their motives are insanely selfish. Like
Hmm.
what they're doing is, like you say, protecting the assets.
Yeah.
That's what they do. In regards to the Shepherd of the Flock of God book, a couple things in case someone's watching who doesn't know what that is. That's the Elder's Secret Rule Book. Rank and file are not supposed to read it. Only elders are supposed to have it. Nobody else. So, like you said, he broke the rules and we let you see it because you weren't an elder yet. I did a word count. The new edition that just dropped is much smaller. Like they shrank it a lot. But prior to that, it was over 60,000 words long. There were
Wow.
more words in the Shepherd the Flock of God rule book than there were in the first five books of the Bible in the
Wow.
Pentateuch. Yeah,
Wow.
that's how big this document is. And
Yeah.
it's extremely legalistic, like Perry was saying. Every little thing it's a legal document, rules, regulations. And the first time I saw it, the first word that popped in my head was Pharisee.
Mm.
That is exactly what
Yes.
I thought when I saw it. It
Yes.
is an incredibly Pharisaical, rule driven, bind up heavy loads, every little thing. Yeah, it has no connection. And again, I
You,
don't mean I'm not going to get off on a like
know,
a religious or
but you've got
Christian
to wonder
tangent,
how
but
they don't see that. You've got to wonder
well,
how do you
how
not see
they've
that? How
got
don't
to
you see
see
that?
it.
Yeah.
That like you're right. There's no way they don't know that that's the case. But once you're so convinced of your own self-righteousness, you don't question anymore. I just that's all the you lose that self-awareness. You think you can
Yeah.
do either that or they just don't care. I mean, maybe they're so insincere they don't care. Who knows? But when I first saw that, if rank and file knew, if the rank and file was allowed to read this book, the Shepherd of the Flock of God book, so many would leave if they saw it.
Oh
These
yeah.
you join a religion, you believe you know the rules because you think, oh, well, they're all based on the Bible, right? But you don't have access to the actual rule book that if you break the rules,
Right.
you could be canned and shunned by everyone who knows and ostensibly loves you, but you're not allowed to know the rules.
No. And the rules
It's
change.
just insane.
Yeah.
And they
And
change
they change
constantly.
year over year.
Mhm.
Did you know, you probably did, that, for example, in the Shepherding the Flock of God book, that it's perfect, it's okay for witnesses to gamble,
Mhm. I saw
but,
that. Yeah.
but they don't tell the witnesses that.
No, they don't.
It's
Yep.
just if a person is doing it, nothing will happen to them. That's it.
Yeah, there's no enforcement. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's but you don't know any of that. And again, it goes back to the same thing with the insurance money. It's that lack of transparency. If the rules are the rules and everybody knows the rules, well, you signed up for the rules. Again, ostensibly, you can't really sign up for the rules when you're getting baptized at 13 or 14 years old. You're not an adult. You can't make lifelong decisions. You can't sign a contract. So how can you sign your life away to Watchtower? But that aside, if everyone really knew the actual rules in advance,
Mhm. They,
a whole lot of us would never have gotten baptized because there's no way I would have agreed to that.
well,
But we don't know.
I'm laughing when you say that because I'm thinking about it. It's like, yeah, when we went through and got baptized, we had the organization book, right? And we had to answer
Yeah.
those questions. But how would that look if instead of the organization book, if they had handed us the Shepherd the Flock book? We would have said, people would have said, yeah, never mind. No,
Yeah, I pass. And I would have said I passed not even because of the rules, but because if I had seen that as a teenager, as a young adult, I would have had the same reaction I had as an adult who left. Pharisee. And everything we were taught was supposed to be anti-Pharisaical.
yes. Yeah.
That's how all the churches were, we were told. But their own rule book is worse than any church that I have personally gone to since leaving the religion. Like it's insane how uh, strict and unloving and unforgiving and diabolical
Yeah.
that organization is. And just the rule book itself demonstrates that to be true. I never would have stood for that if I had known that as a witness in the past.
John, I know we're going to talk about, or towards the end, about, where I am now in my walk.
Mhm.
But I will say this. I have met more sincere, godly, God-fearing, loving people in the time that I've been a Christian than my entire life as a Jehovah's Witness. When these folks say that they love you and that they love me, I know it because I felt it. I've experienced it. I know how, that they've been there in really difficult times, what have you. And all it takes is a phone call, or how we come to the aid of other individuals. That was another pain point for me. How little we did for members of the congregation, or actually how, yeah, we didn't do anything for them. Um, I recall visiting a sister who was in dire straits. She had a daughter who was problematic, constantly getting in and out of trouble with the congregation and stuff. And we went by to see her on a shepherding call, and she was about to get her lights turned off. And so when we left, I turned to the elder next to me, and I say, so it's, I mean, I know what we have in the bank. I'm like, is there anything we can do to help her out with her electric bill? And he said to me, that's what Caesar is for.
Yep. I saw it. I saw it many times. There was a sister in one of the last congregations I was in. Well, the last congregation I was in Texas, who needed a car. Little old sister, alone, widow, all the things. No money, of course, because her husband was focused on the kingdom and
Hmm.
not on taking care of her in their old age. And he was gone now. So her car stopped working. She needed a car. They weren't going to do anything for her. I went and talked to the elders. I was a servant at the time. I'm like, look, and back then, I made very good money. I'm like, look, I have the money. I will buy her a car. Nothing expensive, nothing, extravagant, but something they can get around. So I don't want you to know. I don't want her to know. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna give it to you. You go give it to her. And he did because I insisted, but the congregation was going to do nothing. And having left one of the churches I attended for a long time in Charlotte, when we used to live in Charlotte, North Carolina, it was they called themselves a Baptist church. They weren't really Baptist, but they were still in that, organization or whatever. They had a homeless shelter on the campus, and this was not an extravagant, expensive church. It was nice, but it, wasn't extravagant or anything. They had a homeless shelter where when the weather would get bad, it would cold, it would rainy, stormy, whatever, homeless people would come to the church and church members would volunteer to look after them and they would stay there. They would make them food. They would, the volunteers would do the laundry and make sure they're clean and everything. They did all kinds of community outreach for poor, the underprivileged, like all this stuff. And it just astounded me because this is the first church I went to after leaving the Watchtower. I just could not believe like
Mhm.
how much they would do. But at that point, I'm reading the gospel on my own. I'm like, oh, right. Jesus did all this stuff
Right.
for all the people he came in. He would feed them first. He would heal them first. And then he would preach because what good does it do to try to teach somebody if they're starving or they're sick?
Exactly.
But I didn't make that connection because when you read things through the Watchtower lens, all you see, you're reading it through what the Watchtower says about it.
Right.
And the Watchtower says, oh, that's not important. It's the kingdom, the preaching work, that's how we get. No, it's not. But you don't see that until you
No.
leave, and then you realize, oh, this is a business, like you said.
Yes.
Paul Porter, you know what that word means? It means book peddler.
Yes. Right.
That is literally what it is. They had the title of being a book salesman before, and they decided that was bad PR and they changed it to Pioneer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
It's amazing. I mean,
it is.
I look at not to get into the weeds on it, but just looking at, for example, what happens in the church that I attend, and and our church spends more on missions and outreach in a quarter, in many cases, or than Watchtower does in a year.
Hmm.
And yet they throw all the jabs at Christendom, and that it's this and it's that, and they're only after the money and things of that sort. And it's like, but wow, but did you see? I'm sure you probably did. A couple of when we had the hurricanes, I think it was last year. that they came out with that resource guide for the elders.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I saw it, but tell us
Yeah. So
about it
so
because it's been a minute. So,
yeah, so it was announced that they had this resource guide that was going to be that would be it would be helpful to help for disaster recovery. So for people who are affected, I'm in Florida. We got hit by two hurricanes in a 2 weeks time period. So devastation everywhere. And so they had announced that they were going to be coming out with this information to help individuals who are in those areas. And I'm going, yeah, finally, they're going to do something to, reach out and help these folks get rebuilt and blah, 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 maybe not ask for the money back. And and then when it comes out, it was a rough resource guide of showing people, where they could go, and all it was a booklet that had nothing but government
hmm.
agencies, not a single Watchtower resource, not a single one. But just if you live in this state, this is where you can go. This is where you can call, blah, blah, blah. Where you can find shelters, where you can find food, things of that nature. Some of which were even operated by other religious institutions,
Yeah.
which is kind of hypocritical. But
Yeah, quite. Yeah, Reddit, the EXJW Reddit community, I remember they tore that thing to pieces when
yeah,
it
yeah,
came out because of that. And how many stories people have posted on the channel? Yeah, when I was a witness and I couldn't, like my husband died or something tragic happened, I couldn't afford anything. Watchtower said go to the food bank. And who was the food bank run by?
I was
Churches.
just gonna say I know someone that happened
Yeah.
to. They had
Yeah.
they had to go to a food bank, and the food banks they're operated by the church.
And my point, look, I know a lot of people who watch this, they're not crazy. That's fine. Like I said, I don't care. It's fine. But the point is, if you're going to claim to be, especially if you're going to claim to be God's only Christian organization on earth, you should be following what the book says to do.
Yes.
But they don't, and yet they, talk ill of all the other religious institutions, which admittedly are not perfect. Uh, but in my experience, do far more of those things than Watchtower ever did. Yet Watchtower claims to be so superior and the only
Yeah.
bastion of truth in God's organization and all that nonsense
Hmm.
that they talk about, and they're just not even a little. Even if you're not a Christian, you can look and say, yeah, okay, I don't believe that, but the book does say that if you are, this is what you're supposed to do, and they're not doing it. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say they're not really Christian.
Well, and then they try to kind of poo-poo what the churches are and do by saying, "Oh, well, remember what Jesus said that many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord," and they just kind of minimize it, but they're doing something. Yeah, what are you
And
doing?
but again, that I remember that too. Oh yeah, Lord, see, yes, they can do all this stuff. But then again, when you read it outside of the Watchtower and the lens of the indoctrination, you see, okay, well, who are the sheep that get put on his right hand? What did they do?
Hmm.
They helped the poor.
Yeah.
They fed him, they clothed him, they helped
Oh,
him in prison, blah, blah, blah. Like it was all material support that Jesus says if you did those things, then you're a sheep and get on my right
right,
hand.
right.
And the goats didn't do those things, and that's why they get separated. So even the stuff that Watchtower would cite to try to justify their own behavior, if you actually read the context, says the exact opposite of what
Exactly,
they're saying, you
exactly.
know?
Yeah.
And you
Um,
don't have to be a believer to see that. You
you
just
don't.
read the book. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, just read
Yeah.
it. It's true. But that's well, they practice eisegesis, so
Hmm.
and when you're doing that, you it can trip anybody up, which is why a lot of times they are successful when they encounter people at the door, because a lot of individuals, even Christians, sometimes we don't know scripture as well as we should. And so if I can cherry pick a verse and show it to you in the Bible, show it to you in your Bible, much less, you're going to say, "Oh, wow, it's in the Bible. It's true. They must have the truth." But
Hmm.
but they're taking it so much out of context. So that's why you have to stay true to it that way.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. So, however you believe, it doesn't take a lot of brains to actually read what it really says, especially like in the Gospels, and compare any church to it to see, okay, are they actually doing these basic fundamental
Right.
things? You can argue about like the little small doctrinal matters or whatever, push all that aside. Just the
Right.
basic, big, obvious, major on the major things, and Watchtower doesn't do any of them.
No.
They just don't. The only thing they do is preach. That's it. That was the only thing. They
And
ignored
even that's
everything
questionable.
else. And even
They-
that, yeah, because they didn't really preach the kingdom, they preached the Watchtower, like
right.
their own materials and all that.
But you and
So
I,
bring,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry,
No, no, no. Last
but
thing, go ahead.
but you and I, we were trained to carry the message to the door and speak to the householder. Now they stand by a cart. They don't engage anyone unless you walk up to them and talk to them. And if they knock
Yeah.
on your door, they're gonna give you their typical whatever their presentation is for that month, and then direct you to jw.org.
Yeah.
Because that's how they want to control the information. So
Hmm. It's true. Doesn't even apply. It's a good point. Yeah. There's no passage in the Bible where the apostles stood around with a cart and waited for someone to walk up to them.
yeah, yeah, exactly,
Which,
exactly.
whatever, like that's fine. But the biggest, they don't major on the majors. They don't help the poor. They don't help the widow. They don't help the homeless. They don't help the fatherless poor. They have no charitable outreach. They don't even help their own people in the congregation in any kind of systematized, organized way. It's just up to the individuals to do whatever they want to do or
Yeah,
nothing,
which is very
and
sad.
all that bothers me so much after having left and gone to other churches and seeing just the enormous amount of
Yeah,
outreach and support that they give individuals. Again, not perfectly, but they're trying as opposed to doing nothing.
exactly,
Just
exactly.
that bothers me.
And the fact that they aren't
So,
doing on the back end of this conversation,
mhm,
hopefully we'll touch on that because uh, that lack of charitableness that they have, they're going to pay for it dearly now, especially with the recent changes they're having to make and so forth, and the reason they're making those changes. And
mhm.
this is also something that it's straight out of the corporate playbook, straight out of a corporate playbook.
Talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind. Go into detail a little bit about what you're talking about.
Well, Watchtower is of course, if you're following any of the XJW channels, they've been making a lot of changes recently. Changes on about things that for years have been pretty much carved in stone. They started kind of soft with allowing brothers to not have to wear ties and suits to the Kingdom Hall. Sisters and can wear slacks to the Kingdom Hall, and when they're out in the field ministry, same with brothers. Brothers are allowed to have facial hair, which that was, whew, you couldn't do that. So you had that. And then that was followed up a little bit later with they recently walked back how Jehovah's Witnesses were not permitted to toast like at a celebration
Mhm.
because that was supposed to be tied back to a false religious custom. But now, according to the governing body, they see no reason for there to be a rule about that any longer. And and of course, lots of changes in terms of now the Bethel stay, how that's going to be reduced as well, and several other things that are no doubt going to be coming down. What the biggest one, Jehovah's Witnesses can now go to college without repercussion, which you and I both know. You did that. If you did it, you weren't qualified to be serve as an elder or ministerial servant. If you were an elder or ministerial servant and you sent your children to college, you were no longer qualified to serve. But now it's okay. It's acceptable if a person wants to do that. This is what I call and what we call in corporate a strategic pivot. Have you heard that term before?
I
Um,
have, but not in a corporate sense. So definitely, tell
um,
us what it is.
Well, so a strategic pivot is when you have an organization that is not in a good place, and you recognize that you have to right the ship somehow. And to right the ship, you're going to have to make some painful changes, some painful choices. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost you. Um, Watchtower is in that place right now, and it's of their own doing because for years now, witnesses they don't go to college. They're not permitted to pursue higher education, and so for the vast majority, a lot of them, not all, there are some wealthy witnesses, and there are people who had their own businesses or who had just were fortunate to work their way and get into good positions, but the lot of them are usually they're kind of towards the bottom. Pew shows that Jehovah's Witnesses are in the bottom 10 percentile. They're usually like the third, from the bottom in terms of earning. The Pew Research, and this has been year over year. They haven't budged a bit. They're still there. That creates a very, very big problem for Watchtower. So because they're not educated as well, they're not earning as much, and individuals who aren't earning that much have bigger things to focus on than donating to charitable organizations and the like. So, because they're in these menial jobs, or many of them, and they're not earning that much, they're not contributing to Watchtower the way Watchtower needs them to contribute. You know, remember the congregation still has that monthly amount they're supposed to be sending in. But I saw for a fact that usually the congregation expenses each month were covered by a few. There were a few who you knew who were going to make
Hmm.
contributions of a certain amount, and that was what was going to get you to be able to pay the bills that month. But it wasn't coming from the rank and file of the congregation. So now that they're in that situation, you're looking at now an entire generation, pretty much, of individuals who are now low earners, right? Who are still, out and about, but they're entering retirement. Most of them have no retirement savings, because they weren't saving for retirement because the end was not going to be, too that far off. So they have no retirement. A lot of them are having to live with their children or living very, very much at the poverty line, if not below. And so these individuals aren't contributing. They're not donating to the Watchtower. Watchtower needs these donations to continue. So when you do a strategic pivot, you basically have to make a decision that it's not going to set well with some people. It's going to make some people angry. You may even lose some people because of it, but you're willing to take that chance because of the long-term benefit you're going to get. You may not see that, so they may not see this pay off for them for the next 20, 30 years until that generation now, passes off the scene. But they need their witnesses to start sending their kids to college, because now if they get the college degrees they can potentially earn higher and they can contribute more to the Watchtower Society, and they're willing to take that hit by making these changes to keep it mainstream, to keep people engaged, onboarded, to get this next generation educated up and earning more so that they can then help continue to support the Watchtower. Now that's
That
not
makes
official.
sense.
That's not official, but that's what I read into it because I've seen it happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad from your background and perspective you state that because Beth and I have talked about this for a long time now. All these changes, which I can only imagine the old timers not wearing a tie and a jacket, having facial hair, sisters wearing pants. You can go to college, you can tell all this stuff has got to have the older witnesses up in arms about it because that stuff, that's what made us different
Yes.
from everyone else. Now, you walk into a Kingdom Hall, you can't tell the difference between the people there and the people at any other church. And we were so proud of the fact
I
that we look different and now we don't look different. Well, yes, but we support God's kingdom and don't go to college. No, they go to college too. So where's the differentiation now? And that's got to have the older people upset. But like you said, what choice do they have? It's either pivot or die.
Right. And so they know for a fact some of those older folks. I mean, I'm of that generation, right? I'm of that generation. And they know that this is going to cause a certain percentage of them to attrite out of the organization. And they're willing to live with that because they need that next generation to be positioned to help carry the organization forward,
Yeah.
as they try to mainstream it.
And as sad as it is, the older folks are going to lose, sadly, are by and large going to be the people in that Pew Research survey that don't have any money to donate anyway because
Right.
they actually listened to
Right.
Watchtower
Exactly.
and they didn't focus on their career. And
Hmm.
now they're old and they're at poverty line and they get government assistance, maybe a little bit of Social Security, and that's it. So
Yeah.
they can barely pay the bills. How are they going to, donate to Watchtower? So Watchtower's like, well, if we lose them, we don't want to, but we're not losing any money. And again, those are my words, but I can see it from that perspective. They want to get the younger people, go to college, make some money, give it to us,
Hmm.
you know. But that's a double-edged sword because now you have younger people who, if they go and get additional education, whether they go to university or just get additional schooling or training, well, now you're going to be exposed to things the Watchtower doesn't want you to be exposed to, which is why they always poo-pooed college for so long. They don't want you to be exposed to other points of view and people pushing back on your worldview and your ideology. But now they will. And it remains to be seen how is that going to turn out? Is it going to be good or is it going to be bad? Like, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure some actuarial somewhere and sat down and went over with them. And there's going to be it's going to be kind of cost of doing business, you know.
Hmm.
They know it's going to cost them. There's going to be some financial fallout. They're going to lose some members, but they're trying to get over that next hurdle because, in my opinion, they're really trying hard to mainstream this religion, um,
Hmm.
and they need time to do that. And the generation that I'm a part of is not going to be in that. They're not part of that picture. So they need to get the younger folks in and keep them in, but earning more so that they can contribute more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I've said for a long time, I really think that the leaders of the Watchtower stopped believing around the mid to late 90s when this generation shall no means pass away from 1914 and they all died. Because as late as 1989 in the Awake, it had people of that generation will not pass away. And then they all
Yeah,
died.
yeah.
And now you have this religious institution, which has a lot of property and a lot of cash. Well, what do we do now? Like, it failed. It's obvious it failed. We got to keep this machine moving.
Mhm.
So what do we do? My personal theory is that that is the point at which Watchtower stopped being like the leaders actually believed up till that point, at least to a large degree, what they were saying. And then when it didn't happen, just like Charles Taze Russell, when his 1914 prediction didn't come through, he was never the same and he died 2 years later. I really believe that that's when they're like, oh, well, the jig is up. We
Yeah,
were wrong. What do we do now? And everything from that point forward, it looks to me, in hindsight, looking over it, is them trying to keep this train on the tracks and
yeah,
moving.
yeah. Well,
That's my
because
opinion. You know,
they're on they know that they're on the downward side of the business continuum.
yeah.
Um, and I agree with you 100%. I believe that up until 1975, those brothers sincerely believed that that was going to happen. But the further you moved away from 1975, at some point, the governing body, they had to know. They had to know
Hmm.
we got this wrong, and we need to just stop guessing at this. So stop guessing at it, and let's just make it mainstream. And pretty soon, I think you're going to look at Jehovah's Witnesses, and they'll be different still. They'll always be different. They'll be quirky. But as far as being able to tell them from other religions, it'll be less obvious.
Yeah, definitely less obvious. I've been saying that for a long time. And
Mhm.
you see it. You see it in the changing doctrine, the softening. I recently did a like an analytical deep dive into the verses that have been cited the most, going all the way back to the beginning, and with each president from Russell to Rutherford to Noor to and his name just disappeared,
France.
to Franz, and then going to the governing body, and then from 2000 to 2020, and then 2020 to 25, it's changed dramatically
Yeah.
what they cite and how often and how. And it's very clear from the 2020 to 2025 counts that we are now entering the warm and fuzzy Watchtower
Yeah.
period, where they're more focused on like pastoral type things and far less, it still comes up, but far less focused on all this prophetic stuff and this doomsday
Yeah.
stuff because they know they're not going to survive if they keep that up. There's
They're
no
not.
way.
They're not.
The boy has cried wolf far too many times, and
Exactly.
they have to get away from that, or else they're going to collapse. So
Right.
that's what they're doing. That's
Right.
my opinion.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
There you go. So 2 months before you were going to be recommended, tell us what happened.
Yeah. So the brother that had talked with me and the one that let me see the Shepherd book, we were talking and he had been let me know that the brothers were very, very impressed with, how things were going and how I was doing with the congregation. I was a good example. I was giving at this point I was giving public talks and not just locally. I was being asked to go to other congregations to give, public
Mhm.
talks. And it was kind of cool. I even had we would actually have congregations call and ask, "Can Brother Vanderwall come and give it?" you know. So he had let me know that the CO will be in a couple of months, and we're going to be talking about you in that meeting. In terms of recommending you for an elder. And of course, like any Jehovah's Witness, you're like, oh, me? No, because this is what you work for, right? It's like, you do all of this stuff, and you say you're doing it for Jehovah, but for it's works. You're performing works because that's what's ingrained into you. So as much as they claim that they are not a works-based religion, they are completely a works-based faith. It,
100%. Yeah.
everything with the organization is what have you done for me lately? That sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that really had me. It kind of shook me because I was excited. Of course, you would be, and flattered, but at the same time, I say, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this, because mind you, this is also um, after around the time all the CSA stuff was blowing up, and it was becoming when it first started, it was like, oh, they're just picking on us. But then it was happening. It was too much, too frequent, and too many places, and it was being launched by people that had nothing to lose. It's like they and some of them who had nothing to gain from these from pursuing this, what have you. And of course, having seen the shepherding book and knowing about the blue envelopes, and I didn't have great insight into how Watchtower operated when information came in, but I knew that they communicate because if you I don't know if you've ever written a letter to Watchtower, but you
Yeah.
know what happens, right? Of course, you know exactly what happens, and that surprised me when it happened. That if so, anyone who doesn't know, if a congregation publisher has a question and they don't get the answer from the elders, or they're not sure about the answer they got from the elders, well, some will write a letter to the Watchtower Society, and it goes to the service desk, and the Watchtower will usually respond briefly, and really direct the person to go back to the congregation elders. If they call, you may you'll get a brother who's in the service department, and he may or may not give you some information. But what's important is what happens after the call. And after the call, your elders are going to get a letter that from the society indicating that you called and you had X question, and directing them that they should reach out to you to see where you are, how you are, and if there's anything that really we should be concerned about. you know, um, and when I first experienced that, that did not set well with me at all.
Mm-mm. Me either.
I felt like it's like you ratted me out, you know, and that can kind of put you on a watch list, if you do that enough times. But at any rate, so I knew the process when the circuit overseer would come, that that would be the recommendation. But there were too many things happening that it was just becoming to the point that I just couldn't continue with it anymore. And and so I ended up meeting with the elders, and when I met with them, I was going through some personal stuff too and everything else. And when I met with the elders, um, I said, I have a letter I want to give to you. And the letter just explained that, and I no longer wish to become a Jehovah's Witness. I don't believe that this is the organization that God is directing any longer. And I have serious concerns and questions that I'm not able to reconcile, and I can't reconcile from Scripture either, according to our beliefs. And so I'm opting out. I'm opting out. Um, and to my surprise, the presiding overseer, when I left, who I thought did not like me, actually hugged me when I left, and said, "Okay, we hear you, we hear you." But he said, I know some stuff you've gone through, and I know that it's real, and we accept your decision." And that was it. But that stunned me totally because it's like, I thought at that moment I'm, dead and dead to them, but that's how it ended. And I walked away and never looked back from the perspective of, do I want to, will I ever go back to that? Never considered
Mhm.
it, not for a moment.
Same, same. Did you lose anybody when you left? Like, are you shunned by any family or anything like that?
All of my family who are witnesses, yes,
Mm,
which was my cousins who I was very, very close to. Um, I have a couple of aunts who were still in the religion. My parents were never, and so yeah, all of that I lost when I left, and I still have an aunt who she still reaches out to me even to this day, and I feel bad because my family kind of helped her come into the organization, and she used to live in the Bronx in New York. Now she lives up near Warwick. So you
mm,
know what that means. So they've got governing body members and Bethelites in the congregation, and you would think she died and gone to heaven. And she is
mhm,
just so, to use a bad term, but has drank the Kool-Aid, you know.
mhm.
But she calls me to check on me and see how I'm doing and everything else, and I don't approach it with. I just let her talk
Right.
because if I go there, it's going to shut it down because technically she's not supposed to be talking to me at all because she knows I'm a Baptist, and knows I'm a Christian, so technically she shouldn't be talking to me at all. So I'm like, you never know when there may be a chink in the armor, so I'm just
You
gonna
just never know.
just bide my time and bite my tongue, you know.
Yeah.
But yes,
Oh, Beth and I have heard from so many people that we knew in the past
mhm.
who saw us, saw our channels and reached out and like, oh, hey, I remember you from blah, blah, blah. I'm out now. Yay. So
Wow.
you just never know. You
Yeah.
just never know. And
Yeah.
I wonder, I've looked up people like on social media and stuff and then found out, oh, I'm so relieved they're out. And some aren't, some are still in, but it, again, to the Pew Research, 2 out of 3 born-ins leave the
Indeed.
religion at some
Yeah.
point in their adult life.
Yeah.
So that's most witnesses leave,
Yes.
which means most people you knew eventually are going to be out of the religion. And that's why Watchtower is trying to stop that, like we
Right.
discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My best friend when I was in, I had two. One of them passed away, but one of my we don't communicate really, but every now and again I'll send him a text because I tried it a couple of years ago just to kind of, hey, how are you doing? He knows I left. He knows how I left, and to my surprise, he responded. And we chatted a little bit about family. I don't approach religion. Leave it alone.
Mhm.
Don't want to blow that bridge up. But curiosity starts getting the better of you because you start saying, okay, I know they've got to see this. I know they've got to be feeling some sort of way, and you just want to know. But I'm like, I'm not going to ask. If he brings it up at any point in time, then I'll go there. But I will not be the one to bring it up.
Yeah. Yeah. We were discussing that before. I had people email me, what can I tell a witness, my cousin or whatever, whoever, what can I tell them to wake them up? I'm like, there's nothing you
Yeah,
can tell a true believer to wake them up. Like we've been discussing, they got to get that dent, that chink
yeah,
in the armor first and go looking for some information or have some questions or some doubts. And then if they come to you or they
right.
go to the web or the internet or YouTube or whatever, now they have the opportunity to wake up, but you cannot wake up a cult member. You
You
can't.
cannot. You cannot.
Yeah. So
You know
there's
what?
nothing you
What I
can
do laugh.
say. Go ahead.
One thing I do laugh at is how many Jehovah's Witnesses will get on social media and get into arguments with apostates. And I'm like, wait, your own governing body tells you
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have nothing to do with us. Why are you here? Why are you arguing?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're really here and you're learning something and it's helping you wake up, that's fine. But you're trying to tell us why we're wrong, and it's like, there's a saying you can't argue with a cynic because a cynic has data.
Right. Right. Right.
you know.
Right.
But
I'm
there's
convinced that they're pomies. They're physically out, mentally in. Like a lot
yeah,
of people who they're trying to score points with God because they still are indoctrinated, but they know they're not doing what they're supposed to by
yeah,
Watchtower. And so they think that by going and arguing with apostates, that they're somehow scoring points and that
yeah.
some
I think
it
that's
eases their conscience for what they're not doing.
yeah.
I don't know that there's any hardcore PMEs, the physically and mentally, in that are arguing with apostates, but lots of homies. They're super toxic too because
Hmm.
they're stuck. They
Yeah,
know, they kind of believe, but they don't do.
right.
And so they don't even follow some of the stuff the Watchtower should be seasoned with salt. They don't do that either.
That's
So they
true.
get nasty and
Yeah,
attacking and all that. And then they make witnesses look terrible
yeah.
because people who don't know look at that person like, ooh, if that's what witnesses are like, I don't want to have anything to do with
Yeah.
them. Listen to that guy.
How about
So
that?
they're not helping the cause, is what I'm saying.
They're not. They're not. But you're right. They think they're scoring some points with Jehovah,
Yeah,
by coming
that's
to
it.
the, my mother's a Jehovah's Witness, and they're the nicest people. Yeah, okay,
Hmm.
that's
Yeah,
fine.
sure, sure.
So,
So this has been a fantastic discussion, but to wrap it up, I do want to hear, like I said earlier, like where are you now? What are you doing now? What's your life like now? Just so people who have left or are struggling, because we both talked about before, there's a period of time. It's not easy. Uh, how did it work out for you? What's your life like now? What are your beliefs like now? You've talked a little bit about that, but give us some detail.
so my life is very, very different now, and when I look at it, I sometimes still can't believe this is my life. But first of all, I'm happy. It sounds silly and simple, but I am
Not to
happy.
me.
You know, um, so I mentioned earlier, I did, I felt after a couple of years after I was outside of the Watchtower, I still felt I've never doubted that there was God. That was never a question. It just wasn't who they were saying God is. And so after a couple of years, I decided to go and try this thing called church, which frightened me to death. Because, like I mentioned before we started, I was convinced that the minute I walked over the threshold, air was going to get sucked out of the universe. I was going to drop that on the spot, and all the witnesses would go, "See, see, we told you, we told," you know.
I had the same experience, so I feel you. Yeah, yeah.
Visited a couple of churches, and some of them, it either the message didn't line up with scripture, or the message was kind of a soft message. The one thing about being a Jehovah's Witness is that you spend so much time studying that the cursory stuff doesn't quite do it for you. You know,
Hmm.
um, and so I wanted some depth. Some bread. Like give me some meat. When I'm looking for a spiritual food, and I found a church that I attend now. I've been with that church for 16 years now. Um, it's a it's a Southern Baptist church. It's a pretty large church. And when I first walked in, I was like, "Oh my God, it's Six Flags over Jesus," you know. Uh, but um, but
I
it is
love that.
but it is the most loving, caring place I've ever been. And when I visited this church and I heard the message being preached by the pastor, there was no question in my mind that I was hearing the true gospel. One of the things I said to you before starting, was that one of the things I struggled with as a Jehovah's Witness was understanding like trying to reconcile that serving God and being a servant of God shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this complicated with all the rules and all the the things that you build in that are pharisaic, that every jot and tittle they're focused on. And for example, trying to explain how they got to 1914, that always blew my mind. It was like I had to take an aspirin every
Yeah.
time it came up. um but when I heard the message and the gospel, it was so clear and it was so simple. And when you think about it, that's in scripture. When Jesus spoke to individuals, he didn't do these long dissertations about which you must do here and there, and all these different things you had to do before, mind you, before you could be accepted by him. My pastor always says that God loves you just the way you are, but he loves you too much to leave you that way, right? you know so
So
yeah,
you're
there's
saying there's no Shepherd the Flock of Jesus book
yeah, no, there isn't
with all
one.
the rules and regulations and
No, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we got a little manual when we joined the church, but it just explained what the how the bylaws work and things of that nature. But that was it. But and so I knew I was where I needed to be. If I can tell a funny story, I know we're at time.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah. We got it.
So when I worked at one of the companies that I mentioned, this is in a training capacity. I worked with a gentleman that he was in the same department and sat behind me. And nice guy. We chatted here or there, but I didn't know much about him. And then I left. I left the company, and he continued on. Never saw him again. Never heard from him. Didn't know what he did outside of work, what have you. Anyway, so when I decided that I was going to join the church and get baptized, most importantly, I'm still struggling, mind you, with all the stuff I've been taught as a Jehovah's Witness and all the stuff that I'm learning now, because now your whole theology has changed.
Hmm.
Everything you thought you knew, you don't know. Even down to like even trying to memorize scripture. I honestly, when I try to memorize scripture now, I still have to kind of remember how it read in the New World Translation, and then I can find it
Yeah.
in, because
I still do that too. So you're not alone. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm still debating with God about this, and I'm like, Lord, you need to show me something, and this is what you want me to do, because everything I've been taught my entire life says this is wrong, this is false religion, but this does not feel wrong. This feels true, and the way I feel about you as a result of this is altogether different. So had that conversation with God, making demands. Anyway, so the day I go to get baptized, I go in the counseling room, and at that time we used to wear the white robes and everything.
Hmm.
And as I walk out the room, this gentleman walks by me. I'm going to change his name. I'm going to use your name. And he
Sure.
walks by, and he 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 looks at me. He goes, Perry, and I look at him. I go, John. He goes, yeah. He goes, are you getting baptized today? I'm like, yeah. What are you doing here? He says, I'm the pastor that's going to baptize you.
How about that?
And I was like, thank you. And then
Oh, yeah.
he proceeded we went out to the baptistry, and in front of the entire worship center, there were like 3,000 people in the room. And he gave my testimony right there in front. And the congregation actually stood up and applauded,
How
because
about that?
to hear about Jehovah's Witness leaving the religion and coming to Christ was just it was amazing for them,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so that's where I am today. I've been I'm not teaching a class now, but I've taught small groups for the past 7 years. Um, I love to sing, which and in school they wanted me to actually join choir, but I couldn't because in school,
Right. Right.
but I was able to sing back then, and I couldn't. So I joined our choir, and which was a whole different experience because I never sang a praise or Christian song in my life.
Hmm.
So I have to learn all these hymns and stuff like that. And not to get preachy, but for the first time, I experienced what it meant to worship, if that makes sense. You
Yeah,
know,
no, it does. The Watchtower is very clinical. It
yeah,
doesn't feel like worship at all. And you don't realize that until you leave and go somewhere else. It's
exactly.
very different. Yeah. Yeah.
The funny thing about Watchtower, so their current song book has, I believe, 250 songs, 259 songs,
Hmm.
if I'm correct, when I checked. And of that 259 songs, 12 are to Jehovah.
Hmm.
12 songs. The
How
rest of them
about that?
are about behavior, Christian living, what you must do, what you must perform, how you must behave, blah, 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 and how you must conduct yourself. Only 12 songs are actually to God.
Hmm.
So that's where I am today. Very, very, never been happier in my walk, and just knowing that we got it right this time.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, Perry. I really appreciate you taking the time. One little thing that I'll little experience mine. When I first went to the first church I ever went to after leaving Watchtower and opened up the hymnal, and I'm flipping through it, I'm curious. I want to know, like, what are they singing about? And I'm seeing, because it was a Baptist church, I'm seeing the name Jehovah all over the hymnal.
Yes,
And I'm like, wait a minute.
they told us.
They told us that no one else uses the name blah blah blah, but it's all over the Baptist hymn books.
Oh
Like
yeah, in our choir
they
room.
sing in church all the time. Yeah.
All the time. In our choir room, we have seven stained glass windows, and each
Mhm.
one is the seven biblical names of God, of Jehovah, and Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Shalom,
Right, right, right,
right
right.
on, right there in the room. And yeah, I was amazed. It's like, wait, they said Jehovah, what? And it's a regular thing. So
Whether or not you think that that's the proper translation, whatever, I'm not getting into the weeds of that. The bottom line is Watchtower lie and say nobody else uses the name, and that's just not true. It's
that's
just not true.
exactly.
Now they don't plaster it as their name, right? Like Rutherford did when he converted the Bible students to Jehovah's Witnesses, but
Hmm.
they used the name in the sermons. They would use the name in the hymns. We would sing the name, like it was there
Yep,
all the time. So yeah, it's just one more thing, one more brick come out of that wall, and that's
exactly,
all. That's all
exactly.
it was.
Right.
Well, this has been fantastic, Perry. I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there any final comment you want to leave to anybody? The bottom line, 30-second takeaway of all this.
Yeah. Um, to anyone who is kind of on the fence. They're in that place where things just aren't adding up for them. Um, I would tell you, like I would tell people when I'm doing investigations, is that if you're looking at something or what's been put before you, and your mind is telling you that something's not right, your mind is right. Don't suppress that. Don't ignore that. So if you're in the organization still and you're having those feelings, those doubts, those questions, don't suppress that because that's your logical mind telling you that 2 plus 2 equals 4, not 5. Doesn't matter what the Watchtower says. Okay, so don't ignore that voice. The other thing is if you are not a witness, never has been, I'm happy for you, first of all, but you probably know someone who is. And understand a couple of things. I think you mentioned it that in terms of trying to find that magic bullet, if you will, that's going to wake that person up. It's more complicated than that. You need to be patient. You need to understand that you're asking a person to change the course of their life, literally. because of what it means if they leave. And a person has to be in a special place to be there and be willing to do that. Um, don't try to club them over the head because that's just going to shut them down. Like I mentioned before, uh, if they come to your door, you're never going to get a doorstep conversion of a Jehovah's Witness. But what you can do is try to plant the seed that gets them to think when they walk away from the door. And that when they get home in the privacy of their home, where no one's looking over their shoulder, hopefully not family members, um, they'll start to explore and dig a little bit deeper and start to widen that crack a little bit more, because it they have a lot to lose if they do decide to leave. And a person has to be ready to do that. They have to be in a place where they are not just physically ready, but mentally and emotionally ready to take that step and just say, you know what, whatever, come what may. But I'm gonna follow my heart and my mind. I know this is not the truth anymore. I can't keep doing this. So be patient with them, and just love on them as best you can.
Excellent. Great advice. I really appreciate that. Again, thanks for taking the time, Perry. It's great. I knew when you sent that email, I'm like, I got to get this guy on the channel. I knew it would be a good discussion, and it was. Even though it ran long, it's fantastic. Wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm probably going to premiere this video some point next week. I'll talk to you about that after I go ahead and shut this down. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know what you think by leaving a comment below, and share your own experiences. Anything you know that we may have missed or didn't cover here, definitely share that with other people so they can see it too. And I'll catch you in the next video. Take care. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about my book, The Broken Mirror: Rediscovering Our True Nature in Christ. Readers call it a fantastic book where you will feel yourself discovering your identity in Christ. One reviewer praised it as 5-star material for the spiritual mystic or group Bible study. It's time to escape legalism and shame. Discover you're already God's beloved child with divine nature flowing through you. With what reviewers describe as excellent writing style and elegant prose, like a campfire discussion with a knowledgeable and gifted raconteur, journey from Genesis to Revelation, uncovering your true identity. This book shows how to access God's peace, wisdom, and strength from within. Your struggles become opportunities for divine light to shine through. Available in hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. The link to the book is in the video description. May God bless your journey along His path for you.